Most of the NFL offseason has taken place as most of free agency has concluded, and so did the 2025 NFL Draft. And over the course of the last few months, a lot of teams have improved their roster to the point where internally, they think they can legitimately compete for a Super Bowl. And while that may be the case, not every team did. And not every team can win the NFL offseason. And in today's video, we're going to discuss the biggest winners and losers from the 2025 NFL offseason. Now, for clarity, saying a team, player, or fan base is a loser of the offseason does not mean they themselves are losers. It's more of a result of the decisions the franchise around them made, for which they will have to more than likely suffer the consequences in the upcoming season and beyond. And for any of the winners, this also does not mean they're destined for a Super Bowl this year either. It's just that they took a lot of steps in the right direction and should be a much improved team from where they were last year. There will be a few honorable mentions at the end, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with the Pittsburgh Steelers fans. The Steelers' 2024 season came to an end with a wild card loss in Baltimore as they lost 28-14 in a game where they allowed 299 yards rushing. And everyone knew entering the offseason that Russell Wilson was not going to be the long-term answer in the Steel City. And more than likely knew that Justin Fields wasn't either, as there was a reason the Steelers opted to go with Russell Wilson in the first place once he got healthy. And what was unfortunate for Steelers fans, and several other fan bases for that matter too, was this was not a loaded quarterback class, and there was no realistic way for Pittsburgh to go up to number 1 overall to go get Cam Ward, and there was also a reason he was the only quarterback selected in the first 20 couple picks. And when you're in a division with Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow for the next several years, you have to have somebody that can legitimately compete against those guys when it comes hell or high water. And I fully understand that the Steelers split the series last year between the Ravens and Bengals, and I acknowledge that, but I don't think it's a coincidence they lost to each team as the season was coming to an end, and ultimately lost to Baltimore in the playoffs when it mattered most. And why we include Steelers fans as one of the biggest losers of the 2025 offseason is because they've went through a lot over the past few months. They traded for DK Metcalf, which I do think will be a good trade for them in the long run, but they also traded former 1,000-yard receiver George Pickens, who is now a Dallas Cowboy. Now, I will say that the Steelers, more often than not over the past 15 years, have been right more than they've been wrong about letting receivers go at the right time, Emmanuel Sanders being one of the lone exceptions. But for Steelers fans to get excited about the idea of these two playing together for months, only to trade George Pickens after the 2025 draft, and now leaving your team with a receiving room of DK Metcalf, Robert Woods, and Calvin Austin is maddening for Steelers fans. I hope Roman Wilson can work out, and I liked Roman Wilson coming out of Michigan, but I think the expectations for a former third-round pick who has no experience with any quarterback on the Steelers' current roster can be incredibly high at times for a guy who played 5 total snaps in his rookie season. And then there's the whole Aaron Rodgers part of this, which only adds to the drama of the current situation, and heading into the 2025 season, I feel bad for Steelers fans because I don't think this screams anything other than another wild card round exit. We are in early June at the time of this video release, and I do think that Aaron Rodgers will eventually be a Pittsburgh Steeler. I just think that the Steelers don't want to deal with the Aaron Rodgers drama of him missing OTAs and have to answer questions about why he's in Egypt or wherever he's at that's not in southwestern Pennsylvania. As much as I've been frustrated by the Steelers treading water over the past really 5 years, I don't think they are obtuse enough to head into the season with Mason Rudolph and Will Howard as their top 2 quarterbacks. But I also don't think cornering yourself to have to play a 41 going on 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers is the answer either, especially with how he played last year and with this supporting cast. I do have hopes for this offensive line, as I really like all of Troy Fautanu, Mason McCormick, and Zach Frazier during the 2024 draft process, but the biggest thing for me when it comes down to it is I don't think the skill position players are going to have enough and be able to put up enough points with this season on the line. I hope I'm wrong and that the Steelers make a deep run, but for Steelers fans, heading into the season knowing the result probably isn't going to be much different than last year, unfortunately puts them in today's video. Next up is the Seattle Seahawks, and a lot of the time on the channel we talk about building teams from the ground up, but Seattle was not a team where they had to build from the ground up. It was always going to be a competitive rebuild, and in the sense of build through the draft and supplement through free agency, I thought Seattle did a really good job of establishing that concept this offseason. Now, I know they signed Sam Darnold to a big contract, but I really like that contract for both sides, as Sam Darnold obviously secured generational wealth for his family, while Seattle is still protected in the long run with that said contract. They gave Darnold a 3-year, $100 million deal, and Seattle can get out of that deal after 2 years if Sam Darnold does not play to the level that he played at in 2024 in Minnesota, and the Seahawks would still be protected. And that's the biggest thing with NFL free agency. As the evolution of the NFL continues, is teams are really smart with contracts. This is not the early to mid 2000s where, hey, we had a bad year, let's throw out a 7-year, $49 or 6-year, $50 million contract in hopes of that said player completely turning our franchise around, and then we are still paying for it 2 or 3 years down the road with another 2 or 3 years remaining on the said deal. Teams are really smart with the way they structure contracts now, and this is a perfect example of this. But Seattle also had a tremendous draft, and they were one of only 3 teams that I gave an A+ draft grade to this year, and I thought they brought in not just one, but multiple starters, as I think Grey Zabel will start at left guard for a couple of years for them, and I do think Nicky Manwari, the safety from South Carolina, was a player who was going to be a very role-specific player early on, and I was a little worried about his landing spot, but Seattle was one of the better landing spots for Manwari, and I think Mike Macdonald will utilize him to his maximum potential, and that he will be a really good player in the long run for the Seahawks, and I really can't wait to see how this defense plays in 2025, especially because they have a lot of young talent in Manwari, Devin Witherspoon, Byron Murphy, who I don't think is getting enough love as much as he should nationally, and I think he is a big candidate to be a breakout player in 2025, and the list goes on for how good Seattle's defense is entering the 2025 season. How Seattle was going to get out of the Geno Smith situation was always interesting to me, because whenever you ask the simple question of whether or not Geno Smith was ever going to lead this franchise to a Super Bowl win, to me was always no. Granted, I do acknowledge that is an extremely loaded question, especially for a quarterback who has resurrected his career over the past 3 seasons, but Geno will be 35 in October, and obviously as a quarterback or any other player ages, typically the production goes down. He's probably not going to have a 37 or 38 passing touchdown season in 2 years when he is age 37. So for Seattle to acquire a 3rd round pick and get out before it's too late, I do think was a good move for the franchise. And the same thing applies to DK Metcalf as well, whose name has seemingly been involved in trade rumors for not just an offseason or 2, but really the past 3 offseasons, since all the way back in 2022 when he received his first contract extension. And Seattle was going to be in a predicament where if they paid DK Metcalf and gave him a 4-year contract extension the way the Steelers did, then they were going to have to pay Jackson Smith-Njigba, and pretty soon you'd be looking at a receiving room that has at least $65 million per year in Jackson Smith-Njigba and DK Metcalf. So for Seattle to get out of the DK situation and to receive a 2nd round pick while also bringing in Cooper Kupp, to me is the definition of, again, building your team through the draft and supplementing in free agency. Obviously, I don't think Cooper Kupp is going to be a long-term solution for Seattle, but Cooper Kupp is a player I think can come in and have a 60 or 70 catch season along with 700 or 800 yards and have 6 or 7 touchdowns and be a good player for the Seahawks this year. They also brought in former Cowboys pass rusher DeMarcus Lawrence in free agency, and obviously I don't expect D-Law to be a Defensive Player of the Year award winner at this point in his career, but Seattle quietly had 5 players with 45 or more pressures in 2024, and if there's one thing Mike Macdonald does a good job of as a defensive-minded coach, it's continuously get after the quarterback, and to bring in a player who could very easily have 45 pressures this year and 6 or 7 sacks is another good move. This team addressed the trenches in a big way. They brought in another weapon for Sam Darnold in free agency, and they also have, to me, one of the bigger draft steals in Torrey Horton, the 5th round receiver from Colorado State. And all in all, this team killed it in the draft and had an effective free agency period, and I think Seattle is without a doubt one of the biggest winners in the 2025 offseason. Next up is the Cincinnati Bengals fan base. For a few reasons and full transparency, I've debated on doing a video exclusively on the Bengals for a while now, but to summarize what the video would be about in one sentence, it's how frustrated I feel for Bengals fans. And the fan base obviously did nothing wrong, nor did Steelers fans, but why the Bengals fans are included in today's video is having to deal with this front office regularly. This front office and ownership group is amongst the worst in the NFL, and the current contract dispute between them and first-round pick Shamar Stewart is a prime example. There was an article that came out recently from the Cincy Jungle where Stewart's father talked about how they want, quote, the same, end quote. And the exact quote from Shamar's father is, quote, we want the exact same that great offensive tackle Amarius Mims got, and for some reason, they want to choose to change verbiage up this year, end quote. And this is incredibly frustrating because not all contract extensions are the same, and we bring contract extensions up, of course, because the Bengals always knew that at some point they were going to have to pay Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and the only question was whether or not they were going to pay T. Higgins. And we'll go back to Shamar Stewart in a second, but to my personal surprise, they paid both of those guys this offseason, in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Now, everyone knows they could have saved money in the long run by paying those guys a year ago, or in T's case, 2 or 3 years ago, but for lack of better wording, the Bengals front office bengled it up and ended up costing the franchise significantly more money in the long run. And here we are with Shamar Stewart, a noted project player who needs as many reps as possible, not practicing because of a contract dispute into the month of June. And I tweeted last week about the situation that this was hilariously sad because this is a rookie contract and that there's not much negotiation that needs to take place to begin with. I know some athletes' fathers legitimately think their son is the next GOAT at their position, but to Shamar Stewart's dad's credit, he seems like a really reasonable father. He just wants his son to be paid accordingly, like Amarius Mims was 1 year ago. But unfortunately, this isn't the only contract Bengals fans have had to suffer through this offseason either, as Trey Hendrickson, who plays the exact same position as Shamar, also wants a new deal, and like we just saw with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, contract prices are going through the roof, and pass rushing contracts are no exception. Myles Garrett just signed a contract for an average annual value of $40 million, and Hendrickson has had 3.5 sacks more in each of the last 2 years than Garrett. I don't want to get into the conversation of who's the best pass rusher in the NFL, but the point is, this is another blunder by the Bengals front office, which could have been solved 2 years ago by giving Trey Hendrickson a contract back then. On March 5th of this year, Max Crosby signed a 3-for-106 deal, which put him at an AAV, or average annual value, of $35.3 million for the next few years. He was the NFL's non-highest paid quarterback at the time. I was obviously happy for Max and his family, but thought $35 million per year is an insane amount of money until Myles Garrett was paid $5 million more per year 4 days later. And the people who suffer through this are the fans, as they have no say in what their front office does, and a lot of the Bengals' problems are because they end up shooting themselves in the foot over very preventable problems. Now, contracts in the NFL do require a lot of upfront capital from the owners, who have to put money in separate escrow accounts, but that's not the fans' problem, and I feel bad for Bengals fans because they are the ones who have to deal with the incompetence of the team's front office when the solution from the start was simple: pay Jamar, T, and Trey when they asked for their contracts years ago. Now, the earliest Jamar could have signed an extension was last year, but by waiting a year, it cost the team over $5 million per year, and who knows how many million extra for T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson too if he eventually signs. Next up, Chicago Bears. I know. Go ahead and type the comments, get the jokes out of the way. They won the offseason again. They are their 5th straight Super Bowl. They have a dynasty cooking. This dynasty would beat Michael Jordan's Bulls because it's a 4-peat, not a 3-peat. I know, but I really think this is different this year for a couple of reasons. Caleb Williams was sacked 68 times in 2024, which was by far the most in the NFL. Now, I will go ahead and acknowledge that some of those sacks were certainly not on the offensive line, and there were certainly plays where Caleb tried to extend, and he would make a play that should have been an incomplete pass at worst, really a 7, 8, 10-yard loss that, again, should have been an incomplete throwaway at worst. But there were also times where he legitimately didn't stand a chance, and with Ben Johnson as the team's head coach, they improved the interior offensive line significantly as they traded for Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson, and also signed Drew Dahlman in free agency. And in the first 2 rounds of the draft, the first 2 picks of a new era, with Ben Johnson as the team's head coach, they selected tight end Colston Loveland from Michigan and Missouri receiver Luther Burden III to an offense that already had DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. And with the improvements this offensive line made this offseason, along with Ben Johnson being a significantly better play caller than what they had last year, in a combination of 3 offensive coordinators in Caleb's rookie year alone in Shane Waldron, Thomas Brown, and Chris Beatty, I legitimately think the Bears are one of the biggest winners of the entire 2025 offseason. The biggest thing with the Bears this offseason was they needed some dog in them, and obviously Meadow here, 100% dog, 100% pure beagle, and the Bears upgraded that significantly by bringing in guys along the interior offensive line and to ultimately help out their second-year quarterback in Caleb Williams, and I think that's why they're one of the biggest winners from the 2025 offseason. Shout out to Ryan Poles for doing a great job of constructing a roster that he kind of neglected over the past couple of years and not building the offensive line the way he should have, but that was finally addressed when they brought in Ben Johnson, who also plays a significant role as to why the Bears are big winners. I do think Ben Johnson was a very, very good head coaching candidate, and I'll be honest, I was a little surprised that he ended up going to Chicago, especially when Jacksonville was also a contender for Ben Johnson, considering that Florida has no state income tax, and that Jacksonville is also a very attractive location, and as we know, they ended up selecting Travis Hunter number 2 overall, and the idea of having Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr., and Travis Hunter, along with no state income tax in what is a not great division in the AFC South, compared to the NFC North, to me was a really, really attractive option, and again, I credit the Bears for being able to bring in Ben Johnson in a situation where I didn't think they were going to be able to due to all of the aforementioned reasons. And I know we mentioned at the beginning of the Bears segment that they are routinely crowned offseason champions, but I legitimately think this time is different. Matt Eberflus was 10-24 entering his third season as the Bears head coach, and unlike Ben Johnson was this offseason, he was not a hot commodity during his hiring process. And not only that, but the Bears, of course, were on Hard Knocks last year, and there's legitimate belief within the Bears fan base that they were put on Hard Knocks because Matt Eberflus wanted to... And there's legitimate belief within the Bears fan base that they were put on Hard Knocks, obviously because it was going to be entertaining, but also to try to sell Matt Eberflus to the Bears fan base that he was a likable guy and that if things went sour, well, at least he was a likable guy that the fans could rally behind when times got tough. Now, ultimately, things became disastrous pretty quick as they started out 4-2, then lost every game until the final game of the year in which they won in Week 18 over the Green Bay Packers. But the point was, Ben Johnson is a much better candidate than Matt Eberflus ever was at any point in his career, and that's a big reason why the Bears are winners, along with all of the offseason additions they made to the roster. I also think the Panthers, Raiders, and Giants were amongst the biggest winners of this offseason as well. Please comment below who you think was either the biggest winner or loser this offseason, as well as like the video and subscribe to the channel as it helps tremendously with the YouTube algorithm, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. And until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.